time. Time before flight. Checking in and fresh.
Alright, hello there, welcome back to the channel. I'm your host Prickly Hedgehog. Hope this video finds you well. Thanks for tuning in again. Welcome back. I took a week off last week just to get some, batteries recharged, a little bit of R&R, so to speak, and I went far north to where it's even colder. Here in Minnesota, we're used to the cold. Almost the entire country's had a little bit of a cold snap and some pretty devastating results, unfortunately. Some places really suffering. Here in Minnesota, we're used to it, but I went north and some of the temperatures were, at least the ambient temperature was down to minus 38. We had wind chill of minus 60. And at one point I was out snowshoeing in minus 50 degree wind chill, and I said to my wife, hey, I'm getting cold. I'm going to have to take the lead here. So some interesting experience. I misjudged the cold. I was looking at the ambient temperature. I think it was about minus 9, minus 11, something like that. It wasn't too bad, pretty balmy compared to the minus 38 when you wake up. So I was fine with that because we'd done cross-country skiing in that kind of weather the previous day. So I was expecting it to be okay, but we were on a lake, and when you're on a frozen lake, the wind just really cuts in. It just seems to be even colder than if you're on land or in the trees and things like we were with the cross-country skiing. So, but like I said, we're used to that kind of stuff in Minnesota. So there's an army of snow trucks and salt trucks that take care of the roads for us. But some pretty hairy things that were on the TV over the last few days, showcasing some of the things that have happened. But so again, I hope you're okay. Okay. This week's video is really just going to focus on what was mentioned last week. There was no major patch or anything like that, as I said. There's nothing really to discuss in terms of a change log. What we did get was a little showcase of the Mariana Islands work that Eagle Dynamics is doing, and they introduced a new island that they've produced. And this is Tinian Island, which I wasn't very familiar with. And I'm also going to talk just briefly about the work that Razbam has been doing on the South Atlantic map, or the Falkland Islands map, however you want to identify that. And in reference here to Tactical Pascal's really interesting video. I was a little bit jealous because I'd love to interview, some of these developers about things that they work on. I had my own questions too, of course, but really, really interesting video. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and that will be pretty much wrapping up today's kind of update. Be 2 videos this week, I guess, in preparation for Friday's next newsletter. So let's talk about last week's newsletter and this Tinian Island, which I'm not really familiar with, but according to Eagle Dynamics, Tinian actually is about 1,500 miles off the Japanese mainland, and it was actually captured by the Allies, and particularly the US here, in the summer of 1944. And very quickly they repaired the main runway that was there, that was built by the Japanese, and they also began work on their own airbase, which turned out to be the largest Pacific region airbase during that period. It covered almost the entire island, and it was the launching point for continuous heavy bomber attacks on the Japanese mainland islands. Now, the 4 runways at the North Field, which were constructed, and apparently according to the picture here, looks like there are still remnants of these runways there, and they were lettered A, B, C, and D. They were arranged in a north-south configuration, and apparently resembled the deck of a busy aircraft carrier. Now, the Northfield Airbase, was the first loading and launching point also for the atomic bomb attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And of course, once those bombs were dropped, and it was basically signaled the end of the war. The Japanese did surrender, but if I remember rightly, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the Japanese High Command got together, and obviously the Emperor was part of this as well. But essentially, it wasn't a unanimous decision to surrender. I think there were still some people that wanted to fight to the very end, which fortunately common sense prevailed, but kind of a brutal time. Certainly the Pacific conflict, some of the nastiest fighting occurred there, which is hard to believe because certainly the European conflict wasn't exactly a cakewalk. So some vicious, it really was. World War II is, the more stories that come out, there's a lot of glamour. We had a lot of movies, a lot of stuff was kind of glossed over, post-war period. I grew up as a child in the 80s, and remembering World War II films. And a lot of them are pretty sanitized, but if you haven't read Anthony Beevor's book, he's a British military historian, his World War II book on this particular part of the conflict is a fascinating read. I won't ruin it for you, but some of the stories coming out of the fighting on these various islands by the Allies against the Japanese, Australian, New Zealand, American troops, vicious fighting. So anyway, end of the war. Obviously, the base was no longer needed. It was superfluous to requirements, and it was officially closed in March of 1947. And as I said, I think there are remnants of this airbase there. Now, as I said, the international airport, once it was seized by the Allies, was repaired, and then it's basically consists of 2 parallel runways, and then they renamed it the Westfield. And Tinian Airport now covers an area of around about 1,400 acres, so it's a pretty decent site. And there are, at least one of the runways is quite large. It measures 8,600 feet long by 150 feet wide. In 2012, the United States Marine Corps VMFA-121 squadron operated its FA-18D Hornets there from the airport using the M31 aircraft carrier arresting gear systems. And the airport is now owned by the Commonwealth Ports Authority. Another feature is the installation of a transmitting station known as the Robert E. Camosa transmitting station. And these various antennae, it's a curtain array along the central west coast of the islands, and it is a class of large multi-element wire radio transmitting antennas. It's a little bit of a mouthful. Used in the shortwave radio bands. Now, these things are suspended basically by supporting wires and strung between pairs of steel towers up to 300 feet tall, or 90 meters, and these antennas are used by international shortwave radio stations to broadcast at transcontinental distances. So that kind of sums up what Eagle Dynamics has been working on lately. Obviously, we are waiting for a jump to 2.7 for open beta. And that will mark a significant change, I believe, in the progress that Eagle Dynamics is working toward in the game, and open beta particularly here. Obviously, at some later stage, some of these things will be transferred over to the stable version, so stay tuned for that. But we've got a lot of cool stuff happening in 2021. And as part of that, of course, the third-party developers are busy at work, and we saw this really interesting video by Tactical Pascal and introducing us to Razbam and what they're working on right now, in particular with reference to the Falklands. And I have to say I was very, very impressed. The interview was pretty decent, and we did get some good questions answered. We got to see the map as it currently stands. Obviously, it's a work in progress. Obviously, there was some editing work. We didn't get to see it completely naked, so to speak, and revealing all of its goodies. But what we were shown in the course of the video was very impressive, I have to say. I thought it looked really good. The lack of large built-up areas and stuff like that means I think the game is going to run pretty well. There was talk about the fact that they had deliberately targeted the game, or at least the map, being able to run on mediocre systems, so that people are not, seeing their mediocre systems slow to a crawl. You're losing that FPS. That was mentioned specifically by one of the developers. They talked about one of the reasons for delays, if you like, or the timeline having taken so long, is the fact that the developers are using Eagle Dynamics' in-house software development tools to create the maps and things, which are in Russian. So therefore they have to get them translated. And of course, whenever you translate something from one language to another, you don't get a clean translation. Sometimes it doesn't quite make sense. So that process obviously has been a challenging one for them to interpret and get to know the software and work with it in a non-native language, translating it into English in this case. So yeah, that was really interesting, and I think it dispelled some of the myths. I know that a lot of people, and I think Ron Zambrano kind of talked about this, basically saying, hey, there's a lot of people that like to throw up, speculate as to what's going on, and are critical of Razbam. And I've seen it on my own channel. I know a lot of you are frustrated with the timeline delays, criticisms with regards to how many things they're working on, and therefore it's going to take them, half a dozen years or more before we even see any of this. The F-15 Eagle, for example, and apparently that's going to be a pretty decent high fidelity module, based on the snippets of information that we got about that. Scroll to the end of the video, I'll put in a link below so you can check it out for yourself. Like I said, it's well worth a watch if you haven't seen it, if you're interested in any of Razbam's products. And I think if you don't own the map, it's worth a look, because it looks gorgeous, and will be an interesting product. I think it's going to be obviously the cold version of the Marianas, because it's in the South Atlantic, and the Falklands is a beautiful place, but it's pretty inhospitable in many respects. It's, I guess, kind of like Minnesota. It's cold, and you surrounded by ocean, and a long way from anywhere, certainly England. So that whole conflict, I think, is going to be an interesting thing to recreate, but also you can do your own thing down there as well, and I think there's plenty of opportunity for doing that. They talked about the fact that you could actually hide 2 carrier groups on this map. It's big enough, and it's going to be apparently the largest map. We're seeing also parts of Chile and stuff in there as well, Argentina. So I'm very, very excited for this product. I think it was a really useful video. I was a little bit jealous. I would love to interview one of these guys and talk to them about some of the things that they're working on. I have my own questions, like I said, and it was cool. It was cool to see. I think, like I said, I believe it helped dispel some of the myths that maybe that some people like to throw up there. Some of the criticism. Maybe it's justified. I don't know if it necessarily is all the time. I think when you're a third-party developer working with a larger company like Eagle Dynamics, who are doing their own thing and changing perhaps some of the working environment because they're working on stuff to improve the product, you have to plug into that. That can create delays because you don't get to, the tail doesn't get to wag the dog in this instance, and shouldn't in this particular case. So third-party developers have some of their work cut out for them in terms of having to make adjustments to work that may have already been done, and then let's say Eagle Dynamics does an improvement like the volumetric clouds, for example. Now you've got to go back and redo some stuff, or factor that in, or insert that technology, if you like, or that programming into your particular product. So it makes sense. And also resources, the number of people that you have working for you, the amount of money you can throw at it. Remember that Eagle Dynamics, one of the developers, I think it was Simon, who talked about the fact for every year of development of a full fidelity module, it's costing them about $1 million. So if you have a smaller studio and you don't have that kind of money, you're going to be working to what you can, your own timelines. So yeah, I mean, Razbam reached out to me. I said that they were a small studio, and they said, hey, we're not that small. That was last year. They told me about that. So yeah, I was really impressed with what I saw overall, and I'm looking forward to what they've got to offer here. I think the opportunity to do some really interesting scenarios down there is going to be cool, and I'm looking forward to seeing what that looks like with volumetric clouds, low cloud cover, stormy, wintry mix, which you get down there. If you read up on the conflict, that's where they lost one of their helicopters, tragically. Lost a lot of SAS guys in a tragic crash, flying in just miserable conditions. Shouldn't have been flying, probably. So that's going to throw some really interesting challenges to that particular map, I think, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the final iteration is. Okay, I think we'll leave it at that. I just want to thank everyone for their patience, and like I said, I hope this video finds you well. A little shout out too, I do have a Patreon page now, and if you're not familiar with that, I will put up a link to that. I did get a couple of people already who have contributed. So Operatoroni, have I said that right? And also Greg Clellan, thank you for being the first Patreon supporters there. And obviously I'll give you a plug if you do wish to donate. And it helps the channel chug along with all the views, all the likes, subscribes, and the comments. That's what keeps me motivated. And I really appreciate, again, all the support that I've had for the channel. We're up over 4,000 subscribers now. So again, big thanks. Keep it rolling. Stay safe. Carry on flying. This is Prickly Hedgehog out for this week. See you next time.